Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and it's time for a Caps Collection stream. I haven't done one of these since toward the beginning of the year. Usually on Thursday nights, we do the request, and Austin couldn't make it tonight yet. Something else come up, and so I was racking my brain trying to think of other things that I could stream this evening. And this is a series I was doing a lot last year that I haven't gotten to very much of lately. So I thought I might as well go ahead and do the follow up to the Genesis collection video that I did last year and go ahead and knock out my Super Nintendo games. I don't know how long this will go. I always hesitate saying anything about time because then I'll go forever and everyone will make fun of me. But I doubt very seriously if this goes as long as my Sega Genesis stream. That was almost 2 hours, and I think I have almost the same number of games, but I have more kind of random Super Nintendo games that I were just kind of I kind of landed on. They were just kind of cheap and are not necessarily things that I know a lot about or care a lot about or have played very much. I have a few more like that with Super Nintendo than I do with Genesis, and also there's just a lot more stuff to say about hardware with the Genesis because that thing was so much more complicated in terms of add-ons and different sorts of controllers. And Super Nintendo is, at least for me, a lot more basic than that. Partly because the hardware is so much more reliable, so I didn't have to replace things as often. But anyway, I will start off by going through my history with the system a little bit, and then in no particular order, I'll get into games because I didn't have these alphabetized or anything up in my game room. They're pretty mixed up and random, and so like I said, I don't know how long it'll take to go through all of these, but it'll be fun to go down memory lane and look at what I've got. I intentionally didn't go through all of these before I started, just like I did with Genesis, just like I've been doing with comics and all my other collections. It's fun to kind of jump back into this blind and see if anything surprises me, just stuff that I forgot that I had or didn't think I had, and then here it is. Things that I procured and have never spent much time with and always meant to. I also want to mention before I start that there was a comment months ago on the Genesis video that was complaining that I didn't have enough of the really great but off-beaten path kind of heavy hitters with that system. Like some of the best games that everyone should have were not in my collection, and I did kind of I think point that out in the stream and say that a lot of the things that I felt the need to own or that I've just picked up when I've been at retro shops at old video game stores are kind of more about buying back my childhood and nostalgia and things that just represent something like personal and significant to me, or games that I want to have on hand in case I just really, really want to play them on original hardware. But there's so many ways. It's two things. There's so many ways to play these things now, and to play them relatively close to original hardware, unless you're just a absolute stickler for CRT, which I'm not necessarily. It is nice to go back and look at them the way they were intended that way, to be sure, and original hardware will absolutely look nicer on a CRT, there's no doubt about that, but I don't mind playing a lot of this stuff HDMI, and anyway, there's just so many ways to play these things now, and with a pretty decent facsimile of a Genesis controller or a Super Nintendo controller, that I don't feel the need to own even everything I like to go back and play. And I say go back, and there's a lot of stuff that I discovered through emulation and through the Genesis Mini and the Super Nintendo Mini, which I'll talk about in a little bit as well, that maybe at some point, some of those, if I found them in the wild for a good price, would be fun to have, just to have them. But I probably wouldn't actually play them very much in on original hardware. So some of the stuff that commenter was talking about, and I don't mean to make a big deal out of one comment, but I wanted to bring this up because I, I've got to put the disclaimer with this collection too that a lot of this is obvious or related to licensed properties and things, and so like I'm well aware of how much of a uh, of kind of a novice or a uh, casual gamer I look and I am like I get that I have in my defense I played a lot more stuff like I said emulation than I looked at it when I was a kid. So I have done more of that deep diving stuff and I tried out sampled things that I just never got around to when I was a kid. We rented a lot. We didn't own a ton. Like for each system we had, I I almost want to say it was a quality over quantity thing, but that's not even quite right. It felt that way at the time, but there were definitely games we had that were not the best of the best, just the stuff we played all the time. But on average, me and my siblings, my dad, we tended to have the like 10 to 12 games a system, maybe even less, that we played all the time, and then we just rented constantly. And there were a lot of games that we would rent over and over and over again. I might have told that story when I was talking about the Genesis, about the rental store owner that just gave me a copy of Genesis Tick because I was the only person that rented it, and I rented it absolutely constantly. Hi, Jareth. Good to see you. Nolan Anderson, good to see you there too. Hi, Tyler. Let's go ahead and get into the Super Nintendo. So, the Super Nintendo is the first system that I personally owned. It's not the first system that I played, of course. I'm old enough that I was playing NES before that, and I will do one of these for NES. I have a somewhat smaller NES collection, and I'm much less of an NES guy than I am Genesis and Super Nintendo, and so I almost mixed those in with this collection. I almost tacked that on, and I considered going through those tonight as well, but I do think just as long-winded as I tend to be, it probably would have gone on for way too long. So, and longer than I've got tonight. So I decided to make that its own thing. But that could end up being like a 45-minute stream. We'll see what happens. I'll do that eventually. And then I'm not sure how I'll handle the rest of my game collections. But I have lots of systems. So the way my collection is, there's not one system that I collect a lot more for than others. There are a couple of systems, of course, that I have a lot more games for than anything else. Like PS2, I've got probably 60 or 80 games. 360, I've got quite a bit for. But I have more of a smattering for each system than just a real big library. So I don't own 200 games for anything, like a lot of collectors tend to. And again, pretty casual. That's kind of the name of the game with me. But I am kind of quantity over quality when it comes to systems. I've got a lot of different systems. Anyways, so the Super Nintendo, my mom bought me for, I want to say probably my ninth birthday. It might have been eighth, so this would have been 93, maybe. I'm pretty sure it wasn't as late as 94. It must have been 93. I really think even 92 was probably too early. But I'm not totally sure. I'm a little fuzzy on that timeline. The first system I played was probably NES, and then maybe an Atari 2600 briefly before that. I know I messed around with those when my dad was working at flea markets, and I don't know that we ever even owned one. But we would get them in, and we would play with them. And so my dad owned my dad and my mom split when I was 6, and we lived here in Kansas, and my dad moved back to Arkansas, and so I would play video games when I was at my dad's place when we would go visit him for the summer, and for a long time it was just NES. And I think the first time I played NES was actually at a babysitter's house, but I got really good at like the original Super Mario Brothers, playing at my dad's place. and then I might have told the story already with Genesis, but then my mom for my birthday surprised me with a Super Nintendo, and it of course came with Mario World, and so I have the same system that my mom gave me all the way back then in 92 or 93 with the same cart for Super Mario World, and this was the only game I had for the longest time. So my mom didn't have a ton of money, also didn't really understand the video game thing, and I don't know that it was necessarily like a jealousy thing or a trying to one up my dad thing or whatever. But she probably just heard me talking about playing video games at my dad's house a lot and was like, well, that's obviously what he really wants. And his dad doesn't have a Super Nintendo, so I'll get him the Super Nintendo. But the problem was, and all respect to my mother, she just didn't really get how the thing worked and what and what people wanted to do with video games. And so it was, well, you have this one game that it comes with, and I didn't really rent at my mom's place, so I would take the system with me when I went to my dad's. Well, I say that I may not have even brought it there until I moved back there for a few years. And so once I was living with my dad, now we had multiple systems, and my dad actually sold his NES. I probably told this story before, to get his Genesis, and so we had Super Nintendo and Genesis at the same time. And so I was one of those kids lucky enough to get to grow up with both. And again, we rented a lot, and then eventually we bought, and I'll show these later, of course, but we bought Mario Kart and some other platformers and things. And anyway, I got really good at Super Mario World at my mom's place because that's all I had. And I don't mean to act like woe is me. I adored this game. It was the best thing ever. And she was pretty strict about playtime, which, looking back on it, was smart. And I'm not as strict with my kids, but I certainly don't let them play 3 hours a day or anything. I only got to play this half an hour a day. And this game, especially if it's one of your early video games, is not the easiest game. There's also a lot to do. And so only getting to play half an hour a day, it didn't really feel like I was all that restricted and I didn't have enough to play with. So that's part of why this will always be my favorite 2D Mario game. And I still go back to it quite often. People have the debate all the time about whether Mario World or Mario 3 are the best games. Scott the Waz did a video about that recently that was fun to listen to. He had a hard time choosing between them, or on his secondary channel. By the way, I actually like the Scott Stashes videos better than Scott the Waz. I'll listen to those in the background, and it's fun to just listen to him ramble about video games. This came up recently, so I actually don't... I totally get people that put Mario 3 over this game. It will always be Mario World for me, partly because of secrets, partly because of how expansive that game is, partly because of the aesthetic and the soundtrack. But I get the Mario 3 love too. I share it. I actually, in some ways, find that game harder. At least in the last couple of maps, I don't think I've ever full-on beaten Mario 3. I'm embarrassed to say. I've beaten this lots of times. It helps, of course, that you could save. I mean, these days you have the save states and lost levels. You can save Mario 3 and such. But I think the later levels of Mario 3 are more hard as nails than the late stage levels of this. The extra stuff at the end, notwithstanding, when you get into like into the secret, not Star Road, but that set of secret levels that gives you like Tubular and Bodacious, and if that's one of them, and all of those like Ninja Turtle surfer type words. But anyway, my Super Nintendo still looks great. I'm happy to report. I've managed to keep it out of sunlight. These things tend to yellow, I think about as bad as the NES. And as I'm looking at it right now, I don't think it really has too terrible much discoloration. There are sections of it that aren't exactly the same color as the rest of it now, but it's not yellowed, and that's exciting. Mine, so I don't use the original hardware, like I said, as much as I used to, and part of that for Super Nintendo is because I do have a loose connection in the back a bit, and so it is a little bit harder to not to keep powered on, but to keep it from not kind of jostling and kind of glitching out when you're playing it. So you have to be kind of careful about that. So I play a lot more now on the Super Nintendo Mini, which I've hacked, and I can put anything on this that I want to at this point. And yes, it's emulation. If it's a good emulator, I can't tell the difference too much. And these are really easy to hack, by the way, if you get one, if you have one, or you get your hands on one. These are harder to get than they used to be, but not impossible. Usually somebody's got one up on Marketplace, at least around here, for not a crazy amount of money. And these came out cheaper than you'll get them now. You'll probably have to pay at least $100 to get one. By the way, when I started late tonight, and apologies for the late start, I was having connection issues for some reason, and I don't know if it's my end or YouTube or what exactly is going on, but I'm getting an error message again. So if people are having a hard time seeing and hearing me, just let me know in the comments. And if it gets ridiculous, I'll just table this. Hopefully, I don't have to do that, but I'll just table this for another time because I would hate to not be able to get through it. And somehow we're already 15 minutes in. So I don't know. I'm the worst at rambling and taking too long to get through anything. But yes, so same Super Nintendo that I started with over 30 years ago, and I'm also happy to report, and I've said this numerous times on game streams and when we've talked about the Super Nintendo, but it remains true. I am using the exact same two controllers that the system came with, and I don't have any stuck buttons. It still feels exactly the same as it did when I got it, and they look more or less new. They look not too different from out of the box, and I've played with these like crazy. So the hardware, like I'm not bragging, it's the hardware. It was so well built at that time, and I think the Super Nintendo probably has the best track record of any of Nintendo hardware. Tell me in the comments if you disagree with that. Cause I'm trying to think if anything else beats it. I think GameCube maybe gets close. And Wii's not too terrible. I haven't had a ton of problems with Wii remotes, but and GameCube controllers, but like NES controllers, I've had to replace quite a bit. 64 controllers, notoriously, the sticks can get kind of messed up with those. But exact same controllers that I started with. It's so cool. I've never had to replace these. So I just pulled one of these out. This is the mini controller, and the controller itself is somewhat mini in comparison. When I'm playing with this, I'm not really thinking too much about the size difference, but when you put them next to each other, it is a bit smaller. I'd say it's probably, I don't know, maybe 10 or even 20% smaller than the original. But it feels very similar. The plastic, the kind of plastic it's made of, is not that far off. It still has the same kind of concave and concord buttons, and the D-pad feels really similar. It's definitely the same sort of D-pad. So you get not too far off of the same experience when you play with a mini, which is kind of nice. Let me see what folks are saying in the comments. Jareth, I'll be the weird one to say I like Super Mario Brothers on NES better than World and 3. I mean, sometimes it's also just what you grew up with and what you get really good at. Because I, of course, also love that game a lot. But I do find that it's, of course, limited enough that if you get really good at it, you get to where you can beat it constantly over and over again. Depending on warp zones and things, you can beat it pretty quickly, and there's just not as much to do, of course, in that game. At the time, it felt massive, of course, but compared to 3 and World, but I totally get that with aesthetic and music and You like what you like. Trevor Gano, GameCube controller feels like a work of art more than any other controller. I tend to agree with that. I like the GameCube controller a lot. I think maybe not as much as I once did. At one time I thought that the GameCube controller was the definitive controller, and the problem is I played enough games that require dual sticks now that that's not really true anymore. It's pretty great for anything that doesn't require a second stick, and I realize there is a second stick, but it that doesn't feel as natural if you're playing something that wants twin sticks. It is great for fighting games, of course, which is why we keep bringing it back for every Nintendo system. And I still use it quite a bit, but I think the Pro controller for the Switch has really beaten it out for me. The wireless Pro controller I like quite a bit. Okay, let's go ahead and get into some games now, shall we? I don't actually. Before we do that, I'll just mention, unlike Genesis, I don't have as much peripheral stuff. I I had like other controllers to show and more, not a ton, but a little bit more in the way of accessories. For Super Nintendo, I've just got the original controllers. I've never had any reason to get any third party things. Jason has a Super Famicom controller floating around somewhere that I didn't find before I put this together, so I didn't go grab that. But it is pretty much the same controller, except the colors are different, and it's got more colorful buttons. I think it's got like red and yellow, red and green, or maybe even red, green, and yellow. I forget. And I think it's the controllers maybe white, so it's different colors. The only things I have in the way of peripherals, at least that I found while I was putting this together, I don't have like a Super Scope or anything like that, but I do have Mario Paint, and I have the original mouse, which still works, and it looks great, is in really good shape, and I have the mouse pad as well. And I don't get this out a ton anymore. My kids were playing with it a few months ago. Mario Paint is available now for Switch and Switch 2, which is really nice. And even with Switch 1, you can connect a regular mouse to it and still play with it the way it was intended. So if you have a Switch and you want to go back and see what Mario Paint was like, and you never gotten to play it, you actually can do that, which is really fun. This is not my original Mario Paint. I'm fuzzy on, and this won't be interesting to anybody, but I'm fuzzy on why sometimes certain of my games got sold and I had to rebuy them. And like the Genesis, I have like 4 different Genesises. The Model 1s and Model 2s, and none of them are the system that I grew up with. I think my dad held on to that when I moved out, and then he sold his at some point. Same thing with the 64. So I've had to rebuy those systems. But this one, I think really the only systems I have that are the originals, by originals I mean the ones I grew up with, are Super Nintendo and Saturn. I think those are the only ones. Even both of my Dreamcasts, I had to rebuy. But I digress. So I remember wanting to rent Mario Paint at one point when I was in high school, like a freshman or sophomore, and there was a rental place up the street from my house that was in a grocery store, but it had this massive rental section, and they rented everything there, and they still had video games going all the way back to NES, and you could get Mario Paint there. And I remember trying to rent that, and the guy behind the counter not knowing about the peripherals and giving me the game and not giving me the peripherals. And I remember I was being a dumb kid. I remember being kind of snooty about it and thinking it was ridiculous that he didn't know about Mario Paint. And because I was like, well, he's got to be close to my age. Like I was, yeah, he was working there, and I was in high school. But he was like, I don't know, maybe 2, 3, 4 years older than me. I was like, how'd you not grow up with Super Nintendo and Mario Paint? Obviously, not everybody did, and like you had quite a few people that were Genesis over Super Nintendo, or I played, I, only one or two kinds of games. We're into more, uh, quote unquote hardcore stuff. Not everybody was going to play Mario Paint, so I don't know what I was thinking with that. But anyway, that just came to me. So yeah, I've got a Mario Paint that's in good shape. I don't remember where I got this one, but occasionally we will still fire that up. And Jason is such a musical kid now that he makes the coolest songs in Mario Paint. And we should do a video at some point where he just makes a song and plays it for you guys. He has within like a year and a half taught himself to play piano, and he's a really good like by rote piano player. Uh, we gotta show you guys some of what he's doing at some point. Trevor Gano, yeah, Super Nintendo controller was the perfection point for 2D games. I think that's true. That's fair. I talked about this with Genesis. I think it is, and I have this a lot with Genesis versus Super Nintendo, where Genesis wins out for like sleek looking and just overall nostalgia for me, where I always thought that was the cooler of the two systems. But in functionality and form and really most everything, Super Nintendo does kind of win. It does have the better controller, even if I want to like the Genesis controller more. Like, I can't deny that. It's kind of fun, and I haven't used it in a long time because I have a couple of slots that don't work, but it's kind of fun to go back to the Retron 5, where you can connect Super Nintendo or Genesis controllers into each side, and then you can play from a cartridge. It's emulation, but it loads initially from the cartridge. You can play Super Nintendo games with a Genesis controller and vice versa. And so you can kind of test that theory. You can be like, how much nicer is it actually to try to play Sonic with a Super Nintendo controller? And obviously, you could do that with an emulator and getting third-party controllers that are basically Super Nintendo and Genesis, and even first party with Genesis actually on a computer. So you can do that with emulators also, but it's a thing you can do with the Retron 5. It's kind of nice. I don't know how I'm already half an hour into this. Let's go ahead and get into some games. So obviously, Super Mario World is toward the top of my favorite games, and is one of the better pack-in games for a system. Because I speak from experience. If it's the only thing you have, it was still worth the couple $100 that system cost. Just because they're sitting right next to me, I'll go through these real quick. Jason has bought a few Super Famicom games, and these we can play again on the Retron 5. That is one of the slots that's on that system, and it's one of the slots that hasn't broken yet. I need to replace that system. This is a good alternative if you don't mind Japanese text and you're buying games that don't really require a lot of reading. So it doesn't work unless you've got a way to patch, to do a language patch. It doesn't really work with things like RPGs. But if you're balking at current price points for cartridges, I hear the bubble seems to be bursting more finally, so I don't know how far things are going to fall, but I imagine a lot of stuff will still stay pretty expensive. This is a good alternative because a lot of Super Famicom games were, I don't know if they're just more produced in Japan or why they're so much less expensive, why there's not the same collector market there than there is here. But import them, they are cheaper. So he got Super Mario Kart that way. And I say import them. There's a place in Branson, a flea market booth that still to this day has a lot of this stuff, and so every time we're in Branson, Jason goes and buys one or two of these. So he's got Mario Kart that way, and let's see, Street Fighter 2, just regular plain old Street Fighter 2, and Donkey Kong Country, which is interestingly titled Super Donkey Kong on the Super Famicom, and then this game, you can't tell right away what it is, unless you're kind of familiar with those colors and sort of that font, even though it's Japanese kanji. But this is Fatal Fury 2, which is a game that I played on Genesis, not Super Nintendo, and I've not fired this up, so I don't really know what the differences are with that. But yeah, so a couple fighting games, and Super Mario Kart is one that I don't think you can. I I'm trying to remember if it's this or something else. One of these games, for some reason doesn't work. I'm trying to remember why on our system. There's something you have to do with it. I can't remember. I'll have to ask Jason what that's about. I might be thinking of something else. May actually no. You know what? I think it's 64. I think there are Japanese 64 games that you have to do something to uh, cheat with it so that it will play on an American system. I think that might be what it is. We might run into that when I do one of these for 64. If I haven't bored you guys to tears. Nolan Anderson, have you ever played Simpsons Hit and Run on GameCube? GameCube PS2, I think that was on. I've always wanted to. I still haven't. I have played The Simpsons because I think it's expensive and hard to get. I'll have to look that up. I actually don't know what the price point is for that now, but I know I looked that up at one point and it seemed a little pricey. But it's been a while since I looked at that. I've always wanted to play it, but I do have the Crazy Taxi clone that The Simpsons did, and it's a lot of fun. I've got that on 360. Jareth, there's also plenty of games that didn't make it to America. Yes, that too. I've been picking up the Dragon Ball Z games for Famicom. And of course, a lot of that stuff is really easy to emulate as well. Okay, let me just get myself situated here, moving some stuff around. And we'll start blowing through some of these games. So I have a few things that you saw already if you watched the Genesis video that I have on both. It'll be interesting to see because I don't even remember just how much of that we run into. I think I have Cool Spot on both, but I don't know if we'll run into that. I know I've got a copy of the Tick for Super Nintendo because I'm a Tick completionist and I need the box for that. Odd that I haven't mentioned this yet. So as a lot of you guys will know, and we talked about this with Genesis, the Genesis boxes are easier to keep in good shape, and more people have kept those cases because they're plastic cases as opposed to cardboard boxes. And so I have almost no boxes still for my Super Nintendo games. I had a few that I kept for the longest time, and they just got really beat up, and I held out forever. But like a lot of people, I ended up throwing mine away finally, and I didn't keep them for everything, but I had them for probably, I don't know, a third of my games for the longest time. And I think like Mario Kart was one, and Looney Tunes B-Ball I think was one, but finally got rid of those at one point. There's a reason that Super Nintendo put these out, and Genesis didn't really have anything like this that I know of. If they did, I don't have any, and everyone I knew had these for their Super Nintendo games. So they made these kind of protectors that would go on the bottom of your games so that they didn't get dust in them. And so even Nintendo was keenly aware at some point. I don't know how early these came out, but they were keenly aware that people were not keeping those boxes, and that the way we were all displaying these was on a shelf outside of the boxes with the label out like this, either vertically or horizontally. These don't stack as well as Genesis games do, but they stack okay. And it'd be nice if I had these for everything. I probably only have like half a dozen of these, and I always have them on random games. I never am really even keeping track that hard of which ones I'm protecting. And I don't think they're all that necessary ultimately, because every game that I have cared anyway to go back and play again has worked, or I've needed to clean it, and they're pretty easy to clean. I think alcohol or vinegar and a Q-tip and on the inside, and you're ready to go. I know that being as old as they are now, the batteries are starting to fail on them. I haven't run into that problem yet in not being able to play them, but I certainly, like everybody else on the planet, have run into this with saves. Where my original saves, I doubt I have on any of my games anymore. They're so old. I had it for for the longest time with Donkey Kong Country and with Mario World. Like I was starting to hear reports maybe 10 years ago of a lot of people losing their save data, and I was surprised that mine was still working. And then finally they went away. They do not seem to be working anymore. Hi Slipmaker, good to see you, man. Okay, let's finally get through stuff, and we'll start with this because I pulled this for just to show the protector. This is Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters. I think I showed the one on Genesis also. They are different games, and I seem to recall. I can't remember which one I like better. I seem to recall liking the Super Nintendo one more. Both of them are available on the Cowabunga collection on Switch and I think other platforms. I highly recommend that collection. That's a wonderful way to go back and try these out. And all the Game Boy games are there, and the Super Nintendo and Genesis, etc., etc. I think Hyperstone Heist is on that. Now that I'm talking about it, I'm actually not sure if Hyperstone Heist is there. I can't remember. I think so, but I haven't gone back and looked at that game in a little while. And I bought that for convenience. I have most of the games that are on that collection, but again, I don't go back to original hardware a ton. But I both of these had, and there's one on NES too, but it's different. And it's funny because it's a two-button fighter, but both of these were interesting when I first played them because they had characters that I had never heard of before that were I think most of them introduced in comics or were just in episodes of the TV show that I'd never seen. Give me just a second. We are getting into that time of year where the air is getting real dry. I finally hooked up a dehumidifier today, and I have not quite, or I should say humidifier, and I have not quite gotten the air where I need it yet. Okay, so I got good games, I got terrible games. Here's Batman Forever. That's one of the worst games on anything. Don't play that. I only have that because at one time I was trying to buy every superhero game ever made in the same way that I buy superhero movies. And I did that for a few months and then gave up on it when things started getting more expensive, and because just so many of them were terrible, and I knew I wouldn't end up playing a lot of them. But they were fun to collect, and I might do more of that at some point, but I'm never going to try to collect everything. I also have The Mask, kind of for the same reason. My dad, I've got a few games like this that my dad found. Up until recently, he was running a flea market, and he's still doing some reselling. So he runs into stuff all the time, and will give me first dibs on stuff that he knows I'm into, which is really super cool of him. And Jason and I got a bunch of cheap Super Nintendo games from him. So that was one of them. I remember renting this when I was a kid, and I remember it being okay. It's one of those kind of run around a level and have to collect things sorts of games. I think, if memory serves, and you do a lot of spinning. Oh, earlier, I'm just all over the place. I was talking about peripherals, and I forgot to mention the Super Game Boy, which is a thing that Jason wanted for a long time, and also got from my dad. That is in fantastic shape. And the Super Game Boy was fun because, of course, it let you play your Game Boy games in your Super Nintendo, and it had different color palettes, different swaps you could do, and it also had different borders you could put in. I haven't messed around with this a lot. I don't have more than probably a dozen Game Boy games, and I'm not a giant Game Boy person. I do have an original Game Boy. I didn't grow up with one, but my stepfather, in my, I should say my step grandfather, so the Jeff, my stepdad's dad, I was very close to, and when he passed away over a decade ago now, sadly, he left me quite a bit of stuff, and several of the science fiction novels that are behind me, not in the giant shelf with all the superhero movies, but the smaller shelf, that's mostly science fiction novels, and a good quarter to half of that shelf are books that he left me. And then he also played a lot of Game Boy, and he left me his Game Boy and a bunch of games, and also the Game Boy camera and the printer with some printer paper. I still have all of that, which is super cool. And there was a summer where we went camping, and he and I played with that stuff, and it was a lot of fun. Anyway, so he did not leave me this, but I do have Game Boy games because of him. Anyway, I'm just telling random stories. That's what the collection videos end up degenerating into. Okay, I have, I believe, all of the Super Star Wars games. They're not together, so we'll run into each of them as we go here. But here's Empire Strikes Back. This is the one that I rented and played the most when I was a kid. I never got very far, like with a lot of people, because it's just so freaking difficult, but it looks great and the soundtrack is wonderful. And that's a thing that I'm hoping at some point, and I'm sure it's difficult with Disney licensing, but I hope at some point those can get a collection like Ninja Turtles has gotten, like Jurassic Park has gotten, like Lion King and Aladdin has gotten, etc., so that you can do the rewind fast forward feature and kind of cheat a little bit so that you can see the whole game and get through the damn thing. Of course, you can play it with save states and on in emulator and have a little bit of a better shot. And I'm sure somebody's made it possible where you can kind of do the rewind thing, but it would be nice to get an official release that had that. Here is Spawn on Super Nintendo, was only released on that system. It looks like, oh, for a second I thought part of the label was scratched off, and I guess there's just a big piece of black tape on the bottom of Spawn here. I don't know why that is. Obviously, I own this because I made Spawn here, and I had to get all of the Spawn video games to review them for that show. Although I may have already had a copy of this. I can't remember actually if I bought it for that show, or if I just already happened to have it. Another game that I rented when it came out and found very difficult, couldn't get past the first couple of levels. I worked a lot harder on it for Spawn year, and I made it pretty close to the end. I'm pretty sure I saw the last level, whether I got to the boss or not. I don't remember. I like all the different powers you have in this game. It's just one of those almost too hard. Kind of feels like the difficulty is ramped up so that you can't beat it in a weekend and you'll keep renting it if you don't actually buy the thing. But the soundtrack in this game is really good. I think it actually looks really nice, and it represents the comics really well. And kind of walks a line between being a really adult thing and being sort of okay for kids to play. You kind of just have to ignore the the text about Billy Kincaid and his, kidnapping and murdering children. It's really funny that that's in the Game Boy game. That cracked me up a lot when we did Spawn here. That's a game I think about sometimes going back to and trying to finally beat. But then I have PTSD about the mannequins in the Redeemer fight, and I'm like, I don't know. Here is a game worth having a protector on. Here is Yoshi's Island, which was, of course, branded as Super Mario World 2. Which was a very misleading title because it is not at all like that game, but it's one of the best games on the Super Nintendo. It's a game that I was really disappointed with when it came out and I rented. I'm going to say rented a lot because games were expensive and we didn't have a lot of money to buy them. So every weekend we'd go to the rental store and get one or two things. And I just wanted more Mario World, and this wasn't it. And it was... It felt kind of slow, and it wasn't the kind of platforming I liked doing because you're collecting things that you throw at stuff, and it wasn't as much, it didn't feel like about the precision platforming. There's more of that the further you go along, and more recently I played a lot more of it, and I wish I had worked on it harder and given it more of a shot back then, because I think it's wonderful. I think it's one of the best games of the Super Nintendo, and it's certainly one of the most impressive looking and one of the most original and inventive in its art style. And that was another game that my dad found and sold to me real cheap, and this is not a real cheap game. So I forget what I paid for that, but I mean a fraction of what it's worth. So I got really lucky with that. Here is the Tick on Super Nintendo. I talked about this on Genesis. Genesis is the way to play this if you're going to play it. It's not a good game. It's a guilty pleasure for me. I'm such a Tick fan, and I kind of figured out how to play the thing. It's too long. It's too many levels. It's also glitchy, and there are places where it might just not even let you proceed anymore. It's a problem, but I like what it sounds like a lot better on Genesis. and partly that's just because that's the way I played it initially. So I have this more for completion than anything. I need to get the box at some point and the manual because, again, I'm a tick completionist. The other day, Jason and I had an argument about whether or not I own this game, and I'm holding it in my hand, so he was right. Here's Bubsy 2. Bubsy 2 is terrible. It's even worse than Bubsy 1. Now, I have a guilty pleasure thing also with Bubsy, like I do with the Tick. Some of my favorite 16-bit video games are not very good. Deal with it. It's just you play what you played when you were a kid, and you like what you like, and I recognize the badness, and I still like them. I I like Bubsy less than I used to, but I still have a soft spot for it. It's just how it is. I don't have that with Bubsy 2. I that game has even more baffling level design that's just feels completely random and almost like it was randomly generated and then they just printed it. Not like it's randomly generated every time you get into a level. It's got the one of the worst hub worlds in anything, and it's just gross looking. It's just hard to look at. And so I sold that at some point, and I wound up with it again. That might have been for my dad. I'm not sure. That's another game that I played on Genesis, and the original Bubsy I much prefer on Genesis than Super Nintendo. I'm pretty sure I don't have that on Super, but I guess I'll find out as I go through this. But we did talk about that on Genesis. Anyway, so I don't know. Maybe someday I'll do a stream on this just because it might be amusing. I have done a Bubsy stream. And then we have, again, no particular order. Here is Justice League Task Force. I'm a broken record. This is a game that came out on both. I thought I played this more on Genesis. And I can't remember if I have this on Genesis. But, of course, or I say of course, for whatever reason, I have the Super Nintendo version. All the labels on these are looking really nice. I've got more kind of frayed or scratched labels on Genesis. It's nice to see that a lot of these are in good shape. I just haven't looked at a lot of this stuff in a long time. Pretty bare bones fighting game. I like the designs and atmosphere with this. It's as 90s as it gets with the super muscular designs of those characters. It just looks like they did in the comics during that period. And there were a couple of odd choices. It's got Despero. It's got Cheetah, Despero, and Darkseid. Those are the three villains in that game. So they went for things that kind of feel like Justice League villains. Kind of nice that Aquaman was in it. That was maybe not a given in that time period, but again, pretty bare bones. Not a lot in the way of really cool special moves or anything. So, not a thing I go back to that often. Chewbacca's lover Bubsy is coming back once again. Yes, I have heard that. I saw a trailer for the new one. I don't know if I'm going to bother with that. Because I guess they're doing a compilation. I say the new one. It is one of these compilations I was talking about with Ninja Turtles, where they're doing Bubsy 2 and Bubsy 3D. And that game was like unfinished, and I've never actually played it. I've seen gameplay, but I don't know if I need that just for the sake of completion because I, have the other Bubsy games. I don't know that I have to do that. But I was hoodwinked into getting the two that they put out on I think Switch and PS4, and I think it was on everything. I forget what I had it on. I think maybe I got those on PS4. The first one was okay, and the second one was pretty just straight up bad. But both of them kind of felt like Flash games to me, like they were almost like shovelware, just pretty generic. Here is a game that is worth a little bit. Here's Turtles in Time. Last I checked, that was a $60 game. It might have gone up. I'm not sure. Another game that my dad happened to find and gave me for a really nice price. And this is one of the best games on the system. A lot of people consider Turtles in Time to be the best beat 'em up of that period. And I always like to argue and say Streets of Rage 2, but You've got more of a point on the Super Nintendo versus the arcade because of all the extra added stuff. And since I got this cartridge, I played it a little bit, and I played it some on the Cowabunga collection. I actually didn't grow up with the cartridge version, so I played it in arcades maybe a couple of times, and then when I got the One Up arcade, I played Turtles in Time a lot on that, and so I'm very familiar with the arcade version, but not so much the console version. And I finally have seen some of the extra stuff now, but it was a long time before I did. I didn't really grow up with that. Other bad games I own anyway. I don't know why I have a copy of Mario is Missing, but I do. This was released both on Super Nintendo and NES, and is just a bad educational game that's not all that educational anyway. Nobody should play that. It's funny to look back on now, but was really disappointing and disenchanting at the time. It is really odd, though, playing the one on NES, just because you're looking at the Mario World sprites on an NES game, and that is very strange. Chewbacca's Lover, Bubsy 3D was not their fault if you know how it was made. Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's any more playable or something I really want to mess around with. Trevor Gano, how bad is the Mask game compared to Batman Forever? It's much better than Batman Forever. I mean, it's playable. I've never gotten very far in it. I don't even think it's bad, if memory serves. I mean, I haven't messed with it in a long time. But Batman Forever is just unplayable. That game notoriously has a Mortal Kombat moveset, which doesn't fit with a side-scrolling beat-em-up or platformer or whatever it thought it was, because I can't tell. And it's really cryptic about where you have to stand in order to grapple places, and then you have to press, I think, up and select or something in order to grapple, and that was bizarre and nobody could figure it out. It has a million problems. The soundtrack sounds terrible. The grunt that Batman does whenever he gets hit is loud and hilarious. More beat 'em ups, and again, I don't know why this has a protector over anything else, but here is the first Mighty Morphin Power Rangers game on Super Nintendo. There are several, and there are a couple of beat 'em ups slash side-scrolling platformers. These were kind of both. This one especially, there's quite a bit of platforming in this, and not in that Batman Forever way, where like it knows what it is. It's both, and it's pretty hard. But I remember Power Rangers the movie being harder. I may be wrong about that. It's been a while since I played these, but I remember getting further in this one, and I've got a lot of fun memories of that game. It's got a killer soundtrack, and it looks great, and it's got a lot of the best monsters from the first season. Kirby Superstar is considered one of the best Kirby games ever made, and I'm not a big Kirby guy. Jason loves Kirby. I kind of wish he was able to stay up with me tonight and talk about this stuff, but we own that because of Jason. I've never played this on original hardware. I think I played it for the first time on the Wii Virtual Console. I had a friend that liked this game a lot, and I hadn't played much Kirby, so I was like, hey, what should we download? And he was like, Superstar, so we did that, and it's fun. It's got several different games, and you would think that it would be more generic because of that, where it'd be like just a bunch of kind of pointless mini games, and it isn't that at all. It's a lot of fun, but I can't speak a lot more to it because I haven't spent a ton of time with it. But I like what I played of it. And then there's a more traditional Kirby game that is pretty easy on that system. Somebody tell me, is that? It's not Return to Dreamland, is it? I forgot. I don't know my Kirby very well, so somebody will have to tell me. But anyway, moving right along, here are your usual I almost said subjects. Your usual suspects. Here is Super Mario Kart, which is maybe the second Super Nintendo game I ever got. I'm one of the few people that still goes back to this and can still really enjoy it, and I'm not comparing it to other Mario Karts at all. A lot of people have a hard time even looking at the Mode 7 racing games on the Super Nintendo now, and especially Mario Kart after the plethora of 3D Mario Karts we've had since then. I still play it a lot. I mean, it's been a little while, I guess, but it's still a game I go back to quite a bit. And I like pulling it out because I'm not very good at modern Mario Kart, but not a lot of people can beat me at the original Mario Kart because I played it way too much when I was a kid. And I know those ghost houses like the back of my hand, and you're just not going to beat me in a ghost house. It's just not going to happen. Another game that I still go back to constantly, and the only game that I've worked on for speed running, not that I can do a real fast speed run or anything, but I've worked on it, is the original Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong Country 2, I think, is technically the better game, but I don't care. This is the one that I know the best and the one that I can go through in just over an hour. There's a couple places that sometimes I'll lose too many lives and I'll get stuck and it'll take me longer than that. But on a good day, I can get through Donkey Kong Country in about an hour. I've done it on stream. I think I beat my time record at one point on stream, and I don't know if I've beaten it since then. But there for a while, I was playing that every day for like, I don't know, 3-4 months. Um, and I think I have the other two Donkey Kong countries here too. We'll see if we run into them. Zombies Ate My Neighbors is a game that I love so much, I guess I felt the need to buy it on both systems. I prefer the look and the sound on Genesis, but I prefer the controls on Super Nintendo because you have more buttons and the way they're mapped, your select is right over your action buttons, and so that's kind of nice. But your selectors. My actual most preferred way to play zombies now, though, is actually on an arcade emulator machine, of which I have a couple, and it's just nice to play with a stick. I think that always should have been an arcade game. It's kind of sad that it wasn't. I've talked about this before. This again, I don't have complete. I do have it complete on Genesis, and I never go back to this with original hardware at all anymore. But for the sake of collecting, I'm glad that I have it. Uh, Aladdin on Super Nintendo, another game I'm not totally sure why I have. I am one of those people that prefers it on Genesis, although the Super Nintendo game I think was a little bit easier to figure out where you're supposed to go on the first level. But I haven't gone back to this in a long time. This is probably another game. Well, and I'm seeing Lion King right under it, so I probably got these both from my dad. Lion King is impossible on both systems. Both of these, it's much nicer to play on the new collection that gives you that rewind feature. And Lion King is just a necessity. Unless you've got like a Game Genie code or something that gives you unlimited lives. And even then, there are so many places in certain levels, especially the Can't Wait to Be King level where you're jumping on top of giraffe heads and stuff. It's just so hard to tell where you can land and everything that you're going to die and you're not going to want to start the level over or you're going to punch yourself in the face. So that's the only way to play these now. But I guess it's nice to have them just for the history of it. I played those both, I think, more on Genesis than I did on Super Nintendo. It's weird, I guess. Just overall, I was more of a Genesis guy, but I do have a lot of Super Nintendo, at least comparatively. Like for me, again, some of the best stuff on this system you're not going to see in my collection, and some of my favorite games I don't own physical copies of, but I have them here and other places. So I don't have an Earthbound. I love Earthbound. I've never gotten all the way through it, but I played it in high school, and a friend of mine let me borrow his copy. And even back then, it was worth $100, I think, 80 or $100. And he was really cool and let me borrow it for a long time. I had it for several months, and so I have played it on original hardware, but I never got my hands on a copy. There's other stuff like that. Mario RPG, I may have a copy of. We'll find out as we go through this. I'm not sure. But that's a game I've gone back to a little bit and enjoyed what I played of it. Like, I'm not a big RPG guy, but those are the RPGs that I liked a lot on the system. And then I finally, on an emulator arcade a few years ago, played several hours of, I think, Final Fantasy IV and fell in love with it. And I never thought I would care about those games. But I need to get back to that because that was honestly kind of a special experience where I was like, oh, here's the thing I wish I'd had when I was a kid. Where was that? So, lots of stuff I actually like a lot that I've just never felt the need to spend the money on to get a physical cartridge. Um, because some of that stuff is just pricey, and I already have ways to play them more or less the way they were. I do have a cool spot on Super Nintendo. I thought I had this on every platform, and again, I've got it complete on Genesis. But that game, I like the soundtrack better on Genesis. I think it looks just as good on both systems. I use the bonus level music to open Comic Book Late Night right now, and that's from the Genesis. I listened to it on Super Nintendo; it just doesn't sound as good. Just a lot of it's the drums, I think. Okay, here is the game that's a lot of people's favorite on the system that I've never played very much of because I'm just not a big Zelda guy, but I do have a copy of Link to the Past. I bought this years and years ago before it was expensive. I don't actually know what it costs now. It's probably 50 or 60 bucks, I would imagine. But I like what I played of it. I'm just not a giant Zelda guy, so I never immersed myself in it. I keep meaning to do that. Maybe one of these days. Maybe one of these days. This was maybe the third or fourth game that my dad actually bought us on the Super Nintendo that I played with my brother like mad, just all the time. Next to Super Mario Kart, my favorite multiplayer game on the Super Nintendo was Looney Tunes B-Ball, which really holds up. I've talked about this somewhere before, and maybe I even did a stream with it at one point. I can't remember. But this is just a game with a lot of character. There's a lot of really fun like special moves that you can do. You collect gems, and then you do very true to Looney Tunes kind of powers to pass and shoot, and each character has different ways that they do goofy cartoon things to get the ball into the hoop, and it's really fun. I recommend Wile E. Coyote. And then we have, of course, Super Mario All Stars, so you can play all of the NES Mario games on Super Nintendo, including Lost Levels. That was ported years ago to Wii also in a just real bare bones release that should not have cost what it cost because it was basically just that exact same game and didn't even include Mario World. There is a version of All Stars on Super Nintendo that also has Mario World. Crazy they were able to pack all of that into one package. I like the aesthetic and the updated soundtracks with those. One of the best things about it is the two-player versus mode in Mario 3. Sometimes my brother and sister and I would fire that up and just play that mode because it gives you that same versus mode that you'd get in Mario 3 when you decided to click on the icon of your opponent in the map, and it just turns into a game of the original Mario Brothers, the kind of head-to-head game that's one screen, and it's got a couple of different modes, and if you'd play like best of 3 or best of 5 or something, and it would mix stuff up, so sometimes you're just getting coins, and sometimes there's different enemies on the screen, and it was kind of its own game, which is really neat. That was one of my favorite things about it. As a lot of you guys will probably know, Mario 1, not preferable to play that way. The physics are just weird. You don't get shot right back down when you hit bricks, so you can't get your rhythm with hitting bricks. It's kind of not worth getting as many of them as you would otherwise, and so it kind of makes it less fun to explore if you don't already know where everything is in that game. But I think it is a fun way to play through Mario 3, and I honestly haven't played 2 with it all that much because I was never the biggest fan of 2 anyway. It's a cool game, but I'm not very good at it. Again, maybe someday I'll get better at that. One of my favorite 16-bit fighters of all time, Power Rangers: The Fighting Edition. I'll never understand why it's called Edition because there's not another version of this. This is just the game. But this is a Capcom-esque fighter that is not made by Capcom. It's got one of the best soundtracks on the system. It's a really pretty game. The movesets are all pretty cool. And this is also a game that plays great on an arcade machine if you've got a Raspberry Pi emulator set up for an arcade machine. And like I said, I've got a couple of those, and that is one of our go-to games. It would be fun to get a custom arcade machine painted up for Power Rangers just for that game. I think it would almost be worth it. Or you could also do that, I guess, with Battle for the Grid, with the fighter on Switch and PlayStation and everything. I have an arcade one-up machine configured for Switch with Smash Art that's great. That I don't play with enough, but it's a really great setup, and it plays Battle for the Grid really great. But it'd be cool if you did art for that. It's a neat idea. I'm going to read a few comments real quick before we continue on. We're more than halfway there, so I don't know if this will hit the length that the Genesis video did, but we're going to get closer than I thought we would. Hi, Dan Schneider. Good to see you. Chewbacca's lover, we need to get Cap into reviewing Final Fantasy games. I'm not opposed to it. Dan Schneider, I'm told Final Fantasy VI is the best one of the series, even better than 7, which is the most famous game. Yes, I have heard that as well. The one I played was less fantasy-driven and more sci-fi-driven, and that was a lot of what was getting me into it. It opens with these really cool skyships, and I was like, ooh, what is this? And I found it actually kind of shockingly compelling, and I was getting really into it. And then something came up, and I forgot to get back to it. Thomas Lowe, I just recently noticed I can no longer play classic side-scrolling Mario games because of the timer. That just bugs me. What do you mean? Just like you don't like that they're timed and Mario games now don't tend to be? Like, I think they took the timer out for Wonder, maybe? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong about that. But I think you still have a timer in, like, the new Super Mario Brothers games. Like, I think we kept it for a long time. Okay, I just need a second. I'm telling you, this dry air is driving me crazy. Really appreciate you guys hanging out with me super late on a Thursday. Okay, continuing on with Donkey Kong Country 2, which, as I said, is probably the best Donkey Kong Country game on the system. And then it just gets weird to try to compare Returns and Tropical Freeze. Donkey Kong Country 1 is the one that I go back to the most often. It's the one I know like the back of my hand. And 2, I have to think about more because I haven't spent as much time with it. And once you get to Sticker Brush, it just gets really hard. And so Donkey Kong Country 1 is challenging enough. 2 really ramps that up. I used to feel like the first map of that, especially just going after Gangplank Galleon, kind of feels like we're staying at the same difficulty level we left off of from the first game. That sounds like a nice idea. I don't think that's actually what's happening. It does back it off a bit, but I do think it starts at a higher difficulty than the first game does, and I think it ramps it up faster. Uniracers is probably one of the only relatively obscure games you'll see in my collection. This is a game that I still run into aficionados from this period that have either never heard of or haven't played it and don't really know what it is. But if you're familiar with Uniracers, you'll probably know that that game got tied up with litigation with Pixar, of all things, and has not been able to be re-released on anything. So it's pretty obscure now. A lot of people just have never heard of this game, and it's one of my favorite racing games of all time. It's a 2D racer that surprisingly works, where you don't even bump into your opponents. You go in front of them. You do really cool tricks, and you're playing as a unicycle that goes all by itself with nobody sitting on top of it, and the seat acts like a head and is shockingly uh, has a shocking amount of personality of emoting in it, and it's got a really great rock soundtrack. It's one of the only Super Nintendo games that has good sounding electric guitar sounds, and I wonder what it would have sounded like if we'd gotten a Genesis port. How much better that might have been. But it actually works on the Super Nintendo because it was usually that sound chip is better typically for orchestral stuff. Pardon me, than it is for rock music. But highly recommend emulate Uniracers if you've got a good way to emulate stuff. Okay, what is this? Oh, this is probably the most recent Super Nintendo game I bought. I didn't even know about this growing up, and I can't remember how I heard about this. Probably just listening to uh, a SNES Drunk review or something. He'll do these videos where he'll go through every game in a franchise, and that's probably how I found out about this. But famously, most of the Tiny Toons games are really good. One of the better sets of licensed games that you can get your hands on. Most Disney is good. A lot of Warner Brothers isn't. Like a lot of Looney Tunes stuff is dicey and dodgy, but Tiny Toons for whatever reason had a really good track record. And I talked about this with Genesis because I'm a big fan of Buster's Hidden Treasure. Buster Bust Loose is also a good game. I like Hidden Treasure more, but this is a little sports compilation. I say compilation; these weren't re-released anywhere, but this had 3 or 4 sports games. And the reason I bought it, so this is called Tiny Toon Adventures Wacky Sports Challenge. Again, I had no idea this existed until like 3 or 4 years ago. And I haven't played a ton of this, but I did fire it up in my machine with the original hardware. And it is really fun. I can't remember what all is here. I think it's like soccer and basketball, and I forget what else. But the basketball is kind of similar to Looney Tunes B-Ball, which is why I bought it, and it's also really fun. So I need to mess around with that again. This is not a great game, and it's an LJN game, so that should tell you everything you need to know. It's not terrible, but this is Incredible Crash Dummies. I think the only reason I have this is because the first game on NES is a game I actually like okay. Some of that is it's hard not to bandy this word about some of it is just nostalgia. I played that game at a friend's house, and I remember us playing it for a couple of hours trying to get through stuff, and it being kind of difficult, and that's always stuck with me for whatever reason. But the Super Nintendo follow up is not as good. So if I recommended one of those, it would be NES. But take that with a grain of salt because it may not hold up great. I do have Power Rangers the movie on Super Nintendo. Like I said, that one I believe is harder, but you get to play as White Ranger. And you get to fight Ivan Ooze. But it doesn't feel like it really has that much to do with the movie until later. It also has a really good soundtrack, like the original game. The Genesis game for Power Rangers the movie is the cooler one, because it's got Ron Wasserman music, and because if memory serves, you play some stuff that adapts from actual episodes before you get to the movie stuff. I'm pretty sure. I'm rusty on some of this. Super Return of the Jedi, like I said, I think I have all 3 of these, and I've sampled each of them a little bit. But like I said, they're just nails hard, but they look and sound wonderful. Just give me an easy mode, folks. Oh my god, there's another LJN game. Oh yes, it's Wolverine Adamantium Rage. I can't remember if this is the one that opens with one of the worst songs in any video game. It's like, whoa, 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 Wolverine. Is that this game or is that something else? I can't remember. I think this might be the game where you lose life if you have your claws out. I can't remember. I know it's not very good though. I own it because it's a superhero game. I don't know if you guys know this about me, but that's like a thing I do. It's like my thing is superheroes. And so I own a lot of crap because there's a lot of superhero crap. There's good things, but there's also a lot of crap. This was a game that I rented, I think a few times actually. And I forget for which system because I'm pretty sure they released it on both. I think I'm not sure. Virtual Bard. No, you know what? I say that. I I maybe rented this once. There was an NES game that I played a lot more that was Bart's Nightmare. That's what I'm mixing it up with, and I don't think I have a copy of that. None of the Simpsons games were especially good, except for Krusty's Funhouse, which I like quite a bit. But it's kind of a generic action puzzler that could have been anything. It has a little personality being about Krusty, but it looks like it was probably like repurposed from another game. Virtual Bart is a bunch of kind of like hackneyed, half-assed mini games. It's not the worst thing ever. It's fun to look at once. It's one of those games where you go, well, you represented the IP well, but you don't know how to make a game fun. And that's kind of most people's reviews of most of the Simpsons games. I didn't even remember I had that, and I've also got the box, apparently. So there's a few games, I just remembered this, that years ago, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, Brandon found me when he was working at a thrift store, and they would get games in, and back then, they don't do this now. A lot of thrift stores have kind of gotten wise to collectibles and are charging much closer to online prices now and are even selling online, which I don't know how to feel about, but I won't get into ethics and politics of all of that. Thrift stores are, I don't know. I'll talk out of both sides of my face because, like, I'm not a needy person, but I do like to shop for deals, and it's fun to go to thrift stores, and you go there because you get deals, and I don't intentionally like try to buy out from under people that I aren't doing as well as I am, of course. Not like I'm, loaded and filthy rich or nothing. But it is kind of weird to sell this stuff for the same price that you would find it at a video game shop or a game shop or a comic shop or something. I don't love that. But anyway, Brandon would call me up and be like, "Hey, we got these games in, and they're always priced the same, and so come down and check them out." And these were so cheap that even though they're not great, I bought them anyway. And those are the only games that I've got the boxes for. And then here is Donkey Kong Country 3, which is a big step down from 1 and 2. I don't love the soundtrack or the gameplay as well, or level design, I should say. And Kiddy Kong always just irritated me, and I thought it was kind of lame that you had to play as him. I've never played all the way through this. I keep meaning to finally do that because I've seen a few videos from people that have been more turned around on it after they played it all the way through. And so I'm curious to see if I'll have more of that experience if I ever finally do that. I have finally gotten all the way through 2 once. It's hard. It's crazy how many times I've beaten the first game, and I've beaten the second game exactly once. We are down to the last stack, folks. Here is World Heroes 2. Another of the earliest games I ever owned. I don't know why. Maybe my dad just found this really cheap when I was a kid. World Heroes 2 is kind of a generic Street Fighter. It's fine. It's just basically Street Fighter with some other characters. There's this, I can't remember his name, but there's this character that has a hilarious voiceover when he does his special move. So he does, your typical like press down, slide to the right, press a button, shoot a fireball, right? Your Hadouken thing. But his Hadouken, I swear to God, what he's saying sounds like barbecue Haya. I don't know what it actually is supposed to be, but my kids and I, for whatever reason, threw this in one night and we're playing it. And we all listened to this over and over and over again, trying to get a sense of what it actually was saying. And consistently, we were getting barbecue Haya. Play this game for the barbecue Haya. It's fun. It's not as good as Street Fighter 2, but I'm also not a giant Street Fighter guy. It plays a little slower than that, if memory serves, but it's got some kind of fun characters. And it's also, I guess, like Street Fighter in that I've only played 2. I think that might be on some Neo Geo stuff also, or like there's like a later World Heroes game that is. Here's a game I haven't played in eons. I'm actually surprised I have a copy of this. Here is the original Primal Rage, which I played both on console and on arcade machines. Not one of my favorite fighting games. I never cared for the pot of humor stuff with that, where you can do like fart attacks and stuff. I never liked that. But I like dinosaurs, and I liked the different colored dinosaurs. And I just remember this. I have an action figure for the Raptor in Primal Rage somewhere. I completely forgot about that. Anyway, Primal Rage. So I've got a few fighters. This must be another one that I got from my dad. This is Bugs Bunny Rabbit Rampage. I don't recommend this. It's really, really clunky. It looks gorgeous. Another game that represents the IP really well, but is hard to tell what the heck you're supposed to do. And it doesn't function the best. Giant sprites. It looks cool, but that's all I can say about it. This is another one that I probably found at that thrift store. Vortex. I literally have no idea what this game is. I've never put this in. I don't know what kind of game it is. Maybe somebody can tell. I don't know what this is. Vortex. Jareth Gerhardt, have you played Super Punch-Out Cap? Not much. No. I think it's on the Mini, I want to say. And I maybe sampled it when I got the Mini. But I've never really spent any time with it. People swear by that game. People love it. I never was the biggest fan of the original Punch-Out. Like, it's fine. It was just never really my thing. I'm not like a big boxing guy. And I know like a lot of people love that and they don't care about boxing, but it just wasn't a thing that I ever really penetrated. What else do I have? 3 games left, and I think we've hit all the major stuff. I've got Doom on the Super Nintendo, but this is like a reproduction cart. If memory serves, I want to say Super Nintendo didn't get a Doom, and this is like a fan card that I believe functions. Somebody gave me this years ago. I think it might have been Eric when he lived with me. I forget. Faceball 2000. This game is dreadful. It's like nearly unplayable. It's like a Mode 7 shooter. It's another game that I think was just in that group that I found at the thrift store. And then we have the original Super Star Wars. And that is everything. And then the boxes that I have from that thrift store were Virtual Bart, like I showed you. And I have the box for Batman Forever. Isn't that great? It's in great shape, too. I have a lovely looking box for one of the worst games ever made. And also, I have the box for Aladdin, which is not one of the worst games ever made, but it's not my preferred version of that. Trevor Doom did get an official SNES release. Okay, I just couldn't remember. There's some story with that, and I haven't thought about that in a long time, so I forget. So yeah, like I said, some of my favorite Super Nintendo games I don't even have, because I have ways to play them, and things get expensive, and I prioritize comics and other things. But let me think for a second. Other stuff that I like on Super Nintendo. Where is my copy of Star Fox? I swear to God, I have a Star Fox. There might be a couple of things that got knocked behind a shelf upstairs. I've got a lot of little kids, and they play in that room, and I checked, but it's possible that I missed a couple of things. I'm pretty sure I have a copy of Star Fox, of the original Star Fox. I think 64 is more playable, and I can always get farther in that. I've always liked that game a little bit more. And I think people probably have the same thing with Star Fox that they do with Mario Kart, where like Mario Kart 64 is a little bit easier to look at for people, and so they probably would rather play Star Fox 64. I think it's kind of the same thing. I also like Super Castlevania, but I prefer, and I didn't grow up with the Castlevania games, but I've come to them more recently, and I still prefer Bloodlines on Genesis, which I also don't have, but that's a game, if I found it for a decent price, I probably would buy just to have. But I've got that on the Genesis Mini, and that's where I discovered it. That's where I started playing it. And Super Castlevania 4 is on, I think it's 4. I think that's what that game is called. Is on the Super Nintendo Mini, and that's where I played that for the first time. So again, I've got a way to play that with a real similar controller. And obviously Super Metroid, yeah, it'd be good to have a copy of. Jason loves Metroid. That's one of his favorite games. So that's one that we should definitely get our hands on at some point. But I've got the big, Mario games and platformers that I care the most about, I think. Oh yeah, Mega Man X. You're right. I've only played the first game. That's also on the Super Nintendo Mini. I didn't grow up real hard with Mega Man, and so that was off my radar. I never messed around with that. And then when I got the Mini, it's hard. I mean, if you've never played it before. So I got, I don't know, 2-3 levels in and was really enjoying it. I should go back to that at some point. So I've sampled a lot of that stuff. But yeah, that's my whole Super Nintendo collection. I will do this with my other systems at some point. It was fun to go back and see what I've even got, because there were a few things that I didn't remember I had. Some stuff that I've got on both this and Genesis that I was kind of surprised that I have, and stuff like Bubsy 2 where I was like, why do I even have that? I don't know. So yeah, I know it's a weird eclectic assortment. Some of the games you'd really want are missing, but like I said, got other ways to play them. Jareth Gerhardt, you can also play Bloodlines in the first Castlevania collection, Cap. Yeah, I never bought that. I should get that. I have considered getting that, and I think the sequel had a lot of the handhelds, and I was kind of tempted on that. Those are on Switch, I want to say. I believe. Jincell, Adventures of Batman and Robin was a nice game too, beautifully designed for its time. Yeah, both versions, which are dramatically different on each system. The Super Nintendo and the Genesis version. And the Super Nintendo one has a more faithful soundtrack to, if memory serves, to the show. And then Genesis is just bat stuff crazy, that soundtrack. I like it, but it's weird. But they're both super hard. And yeah, I'm actually surprised I don't have that for either system. I should remedy that at some point. But anyway, but I have emulated those a little bit and rented them when I was a kid. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. I will be back with you real soon for lots more geeky stuff. Tomorrow night, Austin and I, if everything goes according to plan, are doing a commentary on the Superhero Rewind commentary project on the first Iron Man. So join us for that. Hopefully the air isn't as dry and it's easier for me to talk. And then I don't know when I'll get back to these collection videos, but I'll try to sneak them in when I can. I do a yearly tour of the bunker. I haven't done that for this year yet. A few things have changed down here. It should be worth doing again. So look forward to that. And I'll do at least that before the year's out as far as collection videos go. I need to get back to comics. It's been several months, and we're probably only 3 or 4 boxes in. So I'll get back to that at some point. But appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. I was Captain Logan, and have a wonderful night. Everybody go to bed at some point. Bye, folks.